One of the things that we'll probably see in the next 1 to 2 years is the people impact of AI, I think, is a little bit underestimated. It's probably one of the larger technology shifts that we've ever seen.
And today I'm joined by Kim Huffman, CIO of Workiva, one of the leading platforms used by the world's largest companies to manage financial reporting, sustainability reporting, audit, and compliance, all in one place.
The reskilling and the talent shift is something that organizations aren't thinking as much about. That is probably going to be the most significant change that we're going to see in the next couple of years.
What happens if it gives you too much of your time back? Are we going to go to 4-day work weeks, or there's just going to be a lot of people looking for new gigs?
We're trying to incentivize individuals to adopt it while at the same time they're nervous about their job security. How is that translating into business objectives, and how are we measuring that?
I've never seen IT move as fast as it is right now. It's nuts. All those things that we had 5-year plans for, we're going to do them now. Kim, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Well, this is going to be an interesting conversation because I talk to people all the time about like the regulatory and compliance side of things, and even dabble into the the dreaded word of ESG. which I think is really an important word, or I guess it's an acronym, right? But it's, there's more standards now than ever before. There's more compliance, there's more regulatory, frameworks and things like that. How would you describe like what the world looks like today as, what it was like 10 years ago?
I think that world and kind of the office of CFO and, the teams associated with that in general are, there's a lot of fragmentation. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of complexity, but there's also a lot of opportunity. I think, especially when I think about, AI and using AI in the office of the CFO and in the teams and what AI can offer those teams, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for those teams to really begin to work differently. And so while it's ever changing, always complex, always being asked to do more with less, I also think it's an organization and a functional area that's ripe for opportunity if implemented right and done well.
So, talk through a little bit. I mean, you're in the compliance space and regulatory space. I mean, I don't think people really have a good they hear these acronyms and these terms, and I don't think people really understand why or what they're doing. Like, why am I doing this? Why what's the importance of these compliance and regulatory standards?
Well, I mean, I think overall there's been more and more compliance and regulatory standards that have been being asked of global organizations, right? It's one of the reasons why we see such great traction with our largest customers, because they are increasingly facing more regulations, more compliance, more scrutiny. I think especially with sustainability coming on, now we have a fiduciary risk to think about how organizations are reporting their sustainability. And so, what does it all mean? They mean different things to every team and every country and every regulator. And I think that's part of the fragmentation and the complexity that many of the teams in the office of the CFO are facing, and many of our customers are facing. And one of our objectives as an organization is help to make complex things simple and to make the lives of the individuals in the office of the CFO easier. And a lot of what they're trying to do is, meet these regulatory compliance. I mean, you mentioned sustainability earlier, or the dirty word ESG, Chris. That was a huge pivot this year for many of our customers, in that they were headed down one path and then that path changed. However, if they have global operations, they still are needing to meet the European regulations and the compliance there. So, when I say that what we're seeing is fragmented complexity, and by the way, they're being asked to do all of this, and typically these are not teams that get tons of headcount or budget every cycle. So They're trying to do more and more with less. And the scrutiny is increasing. The data requirements are increasing. And, there's a lot of complexity in their world. And there's a huge opportunity, we think, to help these teams work smarter, work better, and specifically around like their most critical data, how they're using it, and how they can work with their most critical data to get the most value from it.
Yeah, and you mentioned these are teams that typically don't have a lot of staff, and they have a lot of data to collect,
Correct.
right? and they're dependent on other people to collect that data.
Yes.
So, it's not like they can just go and grab all the stats off of some server that's sitting there and pull it in. I mean, they got to go to the IT group or to whoever, the sales department, whatever, to kind of do that work. And so that's a complicated interaction, I imagine, for those people, because the people they're asking probably don't want to prioritize that in their world, but they need it desperately, and you have reporting deadlines and all sorts of things like that come into the mix that make it very complicated. How is it? I know you guys are solving for some of that challenge. Can you speak a little bit to like what you do around that piece of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the challenges obviously is so many disparate sources of data. As well as, what we see is, traditionally when we begin to work with a company, what we're trying to solve for is, the disparate sources of data, as well as the disparate sources of truth that may exist in an organization. And really focusing on how do we bring all of that kind of that data that matters the most to the organization together in a single platform, so that it's auditable, it's audit ready, it's secure. And then more importantly, as of late, we can apply AI to that. And AI is actually embedded into our platform at the core. So the data set that they're working with is that consistent data set. And where we see the value there, and many times CROs are sort of in a unique position at our customers, because they're able to unite some of the disparate data that exists, whether that's in a data warehouse or potentially in Workiva specifically for the individuals on the teams of sustainability, audit, financial reporting, et cetera. And it allows us to unlock a lot of value for those organizations. What we typically find is each of those organizations work together, but really there's an immense power in bringing the data into a single platform and allowing all three of those organizations to work simultaneously and to collaborate across functions within the platform on a common data set. And if you think about specifically the sustainability area, the level of data that is needed in sustainability is much broader than what we've seen on the financial reporting side of the house, because we're looking at supply chain data, HR data, et cetera, third-party data, and trying to bring that all together in a single platform, ensuring that it's auditable and audit ready and secure, is a challenge if you're a sustainability controller or you're trying to go out and gather all this data yourself. So getting a data strategy, working with the CIOs. I work closely with our CSO, our CFO on our own internal data strategy of bringing all this. We obviously use our own product, bringing all of this information together. And what we've done for our customers is when we can partner on that data management strategy, they're getting a tremendous amount of value out of that data being in a single platform, and all of the groups can collaborate and work on it simultaneously.
I think that's really interesting, because we talk about single source of truth all the time, right? And and I know from working with different groups of people, they all have their own kind of data. And sometimes it's presented in a way that, like is relevant to them. And, that doesn't mean it's accurate necessarily for another group or another area. And so that gets problematic. And I would imagine that, like having that collection of the data closer to the source of where it's generated, probably gives you more accurate reading. And it sounds like what you're talking about is having people manage their portion of the data to keep it current, and then having it all in one repository where everybody can take advantage of that. Is that pretty
Absolutely,
accurate?
yeah. There's certain data or insights that we might have in the sustainability area that are very relevant to the financial reporting, or vice versa. And it allows
Right.
for consistent linkage. It allows for auditability. So as those teams are working with their numbers towards the end of a period or prior to a reporting cycle, they can be assured that the changes that the sustainability team might be making that are going to be reflected in a financial report or vice versa, and they're all governed with the right levels of controls in a single platform. You've got that traceability, you've got that auditability, and you've got that lineage and trackability within the platform. So you're not wondering, like, why did my number change? Who's doing that?
Right.
Or if a number changes and it's not reflected appropriately in another function, that's where that collaboration really starts to drive high value and that trust and confidence in what they're actually doing with the most important data that they have and their most important kind of functions that they're trying to report on.
So, and I'll say this from like people who've had to provide this data from that perspective. It used to be so deeply frustrating because it was like you get a random spreadsheet sent to you, like, please fill out these 30 pages of spreadsheet, and it's like, but I just filled one out last week and it was like slightly different questions, so I have to like completely redo all my answers, and it was like, you're like, oh my God, I don't have time for this every week, and like, like I imagine having that single source is like really beneficial to the sort of that end reporter, because they have something to start with and they don't have to reproduce it. And if you need numbers swizzled a little bit differently in the finance group, you have the ability to take those numbers and work with them still too, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think too, as at the days of getting multiple requests for the same information from multiple people,
worst.
hopefully we can reduce that across organizations. That's part of our goal. Not just on the financial reporting, but also as we think about sort of internal controls, internal risks, the governance around the risks. How many times are you getting asked to certify or verify something? You send an email, you're like, I just got this email, where'd it go? We trap all that and we capture all of that in the platform. So not only are we helping, the reporting teams, but we're also helping them feel like they have the right level of assurance through our governance, risk, and controls that are all tied to the financials as well. So it's all in one place. It's easy to track. It's auditable. It's AI. We've got AI at the core. So we're driving a lot of, I would say, productivity and automation through looking at what are the tasks that are most, there's the greatest degree of opportunity to help automate for not just the financial reporting team, but also the audit teams and the sustainability teams, so that they can free themselves up to actually drive strategic insights and strategic decisions instead of some of the more routine tasks that those teams quarter by quarter have to do, which is, somewhat painful. So, that's really where we see that huge opportunity with our customers.
So I think that there's a lot of misunderstanding from folks in organizations about, like what the office of the CFO does even, and like what motivates and drives decisions there, and like what are the big concerns in that office? What are you seeing these days?
I mean, I think, if you think about the office of the CFO and even to some extent the office of the CIO, I think the roles of those functions have changed dramatically over the last 10 years. And I think, how can the office of the CFO or the office of the CIO really be a strategic partner to the business? And it's about understanding what the business strategy is, and it's about ensuring that the organization is prepared and ready to be able to meet strategic objectives as well as drive strategic objectives. And I think if you think about the office of the CFO and why we see such a huge opportunity is, reporting is a small segment of what they do. And, the ability to give those organizations more time to do higher value strategic work is an unlock for the business, because they can begin to serve as a strategic partner to the business on planning decisions, forecast decisions. How should we go about making investments and spending time more on forecasting, predictive analytics, strategic investments, those kind of things, versus working on, making sure we've got all of the reporting. It's not that that's not important activities. They're absolutely important activities. We want to just make sure we're providing them the technology to help them to be efficient as possible, so that they can actually focus on those higher value strategic activities. Much like, if I look at my organization, CIO, we are driving business strategy and driving business change. If I think about AI, we are charged, the technology organization, with, injecting AI into the DNA of Workiva, right? And so part of what we look at is, are there opportunities for us to take advantage of AI? I think every organization is thinking about doing that. But I think the office of the CFO, specifically, charged with a lot. They got a lot on their plate. And I know it would be great to free them up to spend more time on some of the high value strategic activities that we'd like them. So, that's what we hope, one of the benefits our customers will realize with the Workiva platform.
Yeah. Well, and not to mention the fact that CFO has liability, as do some CIOs in certain conditions as well. So there's a lot of even personal risk.
Oh,
for them
absolutely. I mean, that goes without saying, right? I mean, you want to make sure your numbers are right, that you're working within a secure platform, they're auditable, they're validated, you've got tracking around them, from source to target, and you're able to report with confidence. That's a table stake. I think that you would hope every CFO is focused on, and we feel pretty strongly. And I think we've got 6,500 customers that feel pretty strongly that that's what we're able to do. So it's good.
So you mentioned AI a few times, and obviously that's a big strategic initiative for you guys. Could you talk a little bit about when you're applying AI, both in your product and in your company, where do you see it bringing the most value for you?
So I think from a product perspective, our approach has been very thoughtful and pragmatic, right? We are very aware of the important fiduciary responsibility, as well as the highly regulated environment that many of our customers operate in, as well as the type of data that they're working with and the type of reporting, and basically the implications of if there's something wrong there, right?
Right.
We need to make sure that we've got a secure, intelligent environment with which to apply AI. And so what we have been is very prescriptive about how we release AI features. We built AI into the core of our product. We did not go out and buy AI capabilities and attach them in. We built it at the core. And we are very, very strategic about always keeping a human in the loop. We really feel like there is an opportunity to add an incredible amount of value to the office of the CFO, whether that's in reporting, whether that's in internal audit or sustainability, by focusing on activities that are routine, that are high volume, that are repetitive, and that we want to provide the ability for those teams to leverage AI in a way that it's doing work on their behalf, but they're always in the loop and they're always validating the result set. And so we were intentional in how we rolled it out. We started with basics. We started with, hey, let's pull in some third party frameworks. Let's pull in some third party regulations so that you can kind of make sure some of your reporting is meeting the regulations, some of the references, those kind of things. and get people comfortable with AI, get them comfortable working with AI in our platform. And then now we've begun to roll out sort of intelligent capabilities around audit sampling, around creating your, your report, looking at how to benchmark what you're doing with other publicly available information and compare maybe your sustainability report with other publicly available reports. And we have all of that being done in the platform so that your data staying in the platform, you're not sending it off to another LLM, and we're pulling the information into the platform, and we're embedding AI into the processes that those individuals already use so that they're not going out and doing it somewhere else.
So it sounds like, it's beyond just reducing the workload of sort of repetitive tasks even. It sounds like there's really a benefit here for, allowing it to do some of the work that you just don't have time to do, like going and cross-referencing against other companies and benchmarks and things like that. Are you providing, like, where's that data all coming from? Is that something that you guys have, like industry standards, or is that something that it's going out and finding and researching?
So we've brought in the data into our platform. I mean, it's all publicly available filings. Filings are publicly available. What we've done is built AI that goes and looks at all of that and does a comparison against what you're showing that may not be publicly available. Obviously, we're not putting that out there. We don't do a compare outside. We bring it all into the platform and do those compares. And we provide insights. We say, this is what in your industry others are reporting against. This is how deep they're going in their various reporting. These are the areas they're focused on in their annual reports. I mean, all of that information is public, and AI, can quickly go through all of that and summarize it. And we're just providing that summary and those insights to our customers within our platform.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be very powerful. I mean, because we talk about just sort of compliance and regulatory, reporting and things like that. But I mean, you did mention, like, executives need this kind of information to make good decisions. Like, are we utilizing our internal spend effectively? Things like that are not necessarily related to some compliance or regulatory thing, but actually just sort of that higher value work, like you mentioned, that they want to be doing. Can you speak to, like, what you're seeing, your customers, like how that's, because I got to imagine that's a fairly transformative process, because it's like something they just didn't have it wasn't feasible for them to do previously.
Before. Or they had teams of people that's all they did.
Or they had teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, one of our customers, we had our customer conference, and she spoke, and she said, I can now take my lunch. I haven't been able to take my lunch for years. I can now take my lunch break. And I also have gone to my manager and said, I have more time to do other things. I'd like to, focus on these other things as part of my function. And I didn't have time to do that before. So it's about...
That's got to improve job satisfaction.
Exactly. It's about giving people time back. It's about giving organizations time back to, maybe have some more work-life balance than those teams typically see. Or...
Well, having a lunch every once in a while is a good thing.
Or, to take on different types of work. And so I do think, one of the things that we'll probably see, in the next, 1 to 2 years is there will be the people impact of AI, I think is a little bit underestimated to some extent, in that
I agree.
Jobs are going to change. I mean, I know there's a lot of concern over, job security and job loss, but I do think there will be a shift. It's probably one of the larger technology shifts that we've ever seen. And how are we organizationally set up to begin to articulate what someone's role looks like in, when they're using AI, or when they are managing teams of people that are agents instead of people.
Right.
And what is that going to look like? And, I think the reskilling and the talent shift is, something that, organizations aren't thinking as much about, that is probably going to be the most significant change that we're going to see in the next couple of years.
It'll be interesting to see how business reacts to this, because you do mention it's like it's going to give you some of your time back, right? but then there's the question of what happens if it gives you too much of your time back, because I mean, like, are we going to go to 4 day work weeks, or is that there just going to be a lot of people, looking for new gigs?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're in between this, and that's, I think, what's also, there's a lot of organizational change management thoughts around AI that are, you're trying to roll out something and you have, I call it FOMO, where if you don't do it, you're like, should I be working with this AI thing? And then FOBO, which is, I'm kind of worried about like losing my job and becoming obsolete. So I'm like trapped between these two states. And, we're trying to incentivize individuals to adopt it while at the same time they're nervous about their job security. I mean, internally, the way that we've thought about it is we have thought about it as bringing additional capacity to the organization, not reducing hours and reducing people.
Which is great for a growing organization.
Yeah. And the reality has been, yes, we've seen capacity, we've seen increased capacity. I think the next question is, what are individuals doing with that increased capacity is where, that's, I think, what we're starting to kind of tease out is, are people taking on new responsibilities? Are, in go-to-market, are we seeing, increased bookings, increased revenue? How is that translating into, business objectives, and how are we measuring that? I think that's what a lot of CIOs and organizations are struggling with right now.
Well, so on that, like, what are you seeing? I mean, is that top line piece of it like happening, or is it like still too early to tell? Is it too hard to figure out?
I go to all kinds of, events and symposiums, and I don't think there's a mousetrap that anyone has found that is working yet. I mean, this is the conversation du jour in a lot of our meetings. How are you measuring this? And I think there's various schools of thought. I mean, we've got, overall measurements of how much capacity are we actually giving back to the organization through the use of AI, and then functionally, where we've got, use cases that are focused on, engineers, we're looking at coding efficiency, coding productivity, engineering productivity, go-to-market, how are we developing assistance for our go-to-market organization? And then how much time are they saving in meeting prep or follow-up or notes and all of those things? And it's still something I think organizations are trying to figure out. And it's similar to when we came out, with any new technology, right? How are we measuring ROI around it? Right.
Right. It's not always easy.
It's not always easy,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that, you mentioned that it's giving you a lot of extra capacity, but I think the other angle of that is it's increasing the speed of business too. And I think that's a really interesting piece that's very compelling because, not only can you iterate faster, which means that you can, sort of resolve issues faster and get to that final, product faster, but there's changes that are happening now. I've never seen IT move as fast as it is right now. It's nuts, and like you have to be so on top of it to keep up with the way things are changing, to take advantage of those changes. I'm going back to now like the office of the executive suite there, and the ability to make decisions is becoming it's becoming very bogged down in the amount of time it takes to collect all that data and things like that. So like what I'm saying is that something like what Workiva is doing is giving the executive suite that kind of insight to not just like report, but to probably move faster too. I mean, are you hearing that back from people that like it's so important that we have this data to move faster now?
Yeah, I think one of the main components of a strong AI use case or strategy to generate insights is where your data sits is it in one place? Is it AI ready? Can we access it? What's the quality of that data, right? And so when you think about aggregating all of your most important data that drives, what these teams are doing in a single platform, and you're able to layer on AI and on top of that, it's a pretty significant force multiplier. And I think the challenge a lot of organizations have, CIOs included, is, as we think about, broadly in the organization, our AI strategy, we're realizing that the data layer and the data strategy can either be an enabler and a multiplier if done right, or it can be a detriment and it can actually slow you down if the data there isn't, trusted and, governed the right way. You might not get the results you want, nor that you would expect, because it goes back to your data strategy. And so where we have seen value and where we're able to kind of bring value to our customers is where we can actually pull all that data into a single source of truth, and act upon that data and provide insights on that data, has been powerful for our customers.
Well, I think that's an interesting point because, years ago, we had started that conversation about the data fog. It's like, there's a lot of data, but not a lot of knowledge, and there's not a lot of, wisdom and things like that. But I mean, it is interesting because, I do see a lot of companies nowadays, they get into a situation where they now have so much data that they are just get into this act of navel gazing, where they just they're crippled by indecision because there's so many data points. So it's you do have to do a lot more than just surface the data. You have to transform that data into something that's actually actionable, right?
And we actually did a survey. It was interesting. We did a practitioner survey of, the office of the CFO, and we found that, coming out of it, it was about AI, and coming out of it was, they felt a high interest to want to use AI in their day-to-day work. Some of their concerns were around, the data and the governance around the data, and that was going to be their biggest challenge, right? And so, which we looked at as a tremendous opportunity in that we can help them with that, because if you think about it, we provide a single data platform that allows them to utilize all the data, and then depending on the fit for purpose need they have, they can leverage that. So, but it is something that, that is in the back of their minds that they're thinking about. The other thing they're thinking about, and I'll because I know this is IT Visionaries, is I think, when I think about the office of the CFO and the office of the CIO, and really unlocking value for for that CFO organization is talking about how it's important to, and this is any CIO, I think personally for me, is how can I be a business partner to all of the functional stakeholders, right? And if I think about the office of the CFO and I've worked very closely with our CFO and our CISO, the power becomes in bringing all of that together, right? Because there's a data element, there's a governance element, and then there's actually the change management and the business process, right? Which is, something that I think our CFO focuses well on. But then it's about enabling a CIO, helping to enable these business partners to really get to the next level. So I think, that is an important partnership and a relationship to have, to really not just power business outcomes, but especially with AI and everything going on, it's even, more important to have that connection there.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that because, if you think about it, the role of the CIO is actually a relatively new concept in history, right? It's, maybe 20 years old, 15 years old or something like that.
I think the roles changed a lot in the last 10 years, right? I think,
Oh, absolutely.
With technology, it's absolutely changed the role. And I think this is probably it's either a heat lamp or a spotlight. I can't determine.
Yeah.
But we got hit with COVID, go remote, and then ChatGPT came out and it was like, go implement AI. So, never has there been so much stuff for us to focus on.
For sure. It's so crazy. And I was going to say, I think there was, it was relatively, more modern term. And then say around 2008, when we had that, the first recession going on, there was, there was a sense that like all of a sudden the CIO role was subordinate to the CFO role, and
Oh,
you
yeah.
saw a lot of CIOs
Reported
then
into, yeah.
reporting into the CFO, and then that sort of changed the nature of how technology worked in businesses. And then, to your point, the world changed again, kind of dramatically, and all of a sudden, every business became a technology company. And then then you roll into like the COVID and like, oh my gosh, we had to rapidly transform we have about 3 months to completely, all those things that we had 5-year plans for, we're going to do them now,
Overnight. Go.
Overnight. And it was wildly unrealistic in a lot of ways, but surprising in the fact that I think a lot of CIOs actually stepped up to that role and like pulled off like literal miracles from what I saw, in those times. So, and then you mentioned like now we've got the AI thing going
data,
on.
security. I mean, it just, it doesn't
security
sleep.
is another big one.
I know it's,
I mean, how it almost seems like the role of the CIO is getting to be too much for one person in some regards. There's so much going on. I mean, from like, I know we've got CISOs and CTOs and, like people to kind of divide it out. But I've even seen some areas where like, these functions are in a larger company being broken out along lines of business and things like that too, because there's tremendous complexity to this job.
There's tremendous complexity, and and I think the one thing too is they're not all like similar functional remits. If you think about data, you think about business systems, you think about security, they're different functional remits. I mean, there's different teams, different mentalities of teams, different mindsets of teams working under the CIO. I think, with AI specifically though, I mean, the AI, the remit of AI it's a team sport. I mean, there's nothing that a CIO can do without full sponsorship and partnership at the functional levels, at the executive level. And that's really true of, I think, many of the things that, we're trying to do from a strategic perspective. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of organizations that are, depending on the size, they're breaking out they've got the CDIOs, they've got the chief AI officers, they've got CISOs, and they're breaking them out because the remit is large. And I think it's really dependent on the nature of the company, the team, global responsibilities. I have ADD, so it's perfect for me. I like to do wear multiple hats. But it has been a busy 5 years, I would say.
Yeah, and there's no sign of it slowing, right? I mean,
but this is exciting. I mean, this AI we will look back on this, and it will be the biggest. I think one of the biggest transformation moments in organizationally. We'll look back and we'll identify what it is. We've just scratched the surface. Hopefully, I'll be retired.
Yeah. What's retirement? I never get to do that. No, but I think it speaks. I mean, like, where do you see like the role of the CIO? Like you said, it's changed so much in 5 years. What do you think the next 5 years is going to bring?
Well, I mean, I think, one of the things that I think we've seen with AI is it's the first time that we've democratized a technology or a technology has been introduced to individuals in an organization at home prior to it being introduced at work. And you can use the same technology at home than you can use at work. No other technology has, I mean, there was the difference between B2B and B2C, software, but they were different. You don't have a Salesforce type software that you're using at home. Not true with AI and ChatGPT. So it's the first time we've seen this phenomenon occur. And I think what it is doing is it's bringing technical capabilities closer to the business. And so I think when you think about the role of, your business applications or your corporate, applications team, it's going to change dramatically where it's probably going to be more of a center of excellence for capabilities that are then utilized by the business that are able to, much like you think about onboarding a new employee, you would onboard a new agent with new capabilities. That's where I think it's going to go. So I think it's about enabling the organization to utilize this technology more so than we've seen previously, right? I think with SaaS, there was always like, well, you can configure your own reports and you can do some configuration here. But this is true, like we're going to democratize these capabilities out to functional people and to individuals so they can develop their own assistants, which we haven't done before in an organization. So how does the technology organization or the business technology organization create a framework, create a services type offering to enable that in a workplace to work for each individual employee? Like that to me is the vision of where we're going to probably go, which is kind of exciting and fun. And we're not there yet, but those are the things I think about, right? I want an assistant. I need someone to help me do my meeting prep. Oh, let me pull this up and leverage it. But we got to make sure it's safe, it's secure, because it's in the enterprise environment. So I think it's going to be a focus less on the building out a lot of different processes and more about enabling the capabilities that are then kind of like, I'm creating my own employee or my assistant that can do things for me in my role. And I need them to do these, kind of jobs to be done. I'm going to bring this group together, or these group of agents together, to get these jobs to be done. And they have a catalog of capabilities, right? That's where I see it going, probably. I mean, that's like, 2 or, I don't know how far away it is, but that's kind of where I see it going.
Yeah, I mean, you think, oh, that's like 5 years away, but maybe it's like 3 months away at the way everything's going. Well, I mean, but that's an interesting idea, because like if you think about it, like maybe you've got 100 employees in your organization that you're kind of keeping track of, and then all of them have employees, and now all of a sudden you went from 100 to 100,000, with all these agents, like how, managing to that is one
How do you
thing,
govern it?
Yeah, but then I wonder, like, who at the end of the day should own those agents? Like, is that something that, like, are people, it's sort of the BYOD kind of conversation. Like, are people going to be like, well, I have all these agents in my personal life that I use and leverage, and should I bring those into the workplace? And then how do you vet those? And then but then you restrict it. And then that's like sort of that. I mean, the one analog I could kind of think to that was sort of that dichotomy between, like private and business is sort of like when the internet started getting really big and everybody, like the companies had T1s, which were relatively slow to some of the broadband offerings. And they're like, I got faster internet at home,
yeah.
I mean, is it going to be like that where like everybody's like, but I got better agents at home, and I, like, I'm not going to use your agents, I'm going to use my agents.
Well, I mean,
and
I
then,
think
like,
every CIO
chaos.
you talk to saw that. Is like, I want to use ChatGPT, I use it at home. Why can't I use it here, right? It's like you're using the free version and you're sending your data to God knows who, and you can't do that in a corporate environment. So, I think most organizations have worked through that nuance, and now people are aware of like, how these, part of it is the literacy that you focus on as far as an AI program, awareness, literacy, where the data is going. There was a lot of that early on. And I think people are cognizant of that now and realize, like, I can use this at home. Why can't I use it here? Because the data is different. But yeah, they have a home version of something, and it's the latest and greatest, and they don't understand why we haven't rolled it out internally. And why does it take so long to vet things internally when I can use it on my home computer? So that's another interesting challenge.
Piece of it. Well, and interestingly, and that sounds a lot like compliance too. It's like, I can do these things at home. Why can't I do them at work? Because like that doesn't fit in with our compliance thing. And I think that's one of the things, when we get back to that, like the whole, like, I got to do all this reporting for compliance and things like that. I mean, like it is actually designed to slow you down a bit, because like you do have to like spend time vetting things. So, in our personal lives, we gauge risk very differently than what risk to a corporation is, potentially. Yeah. And sometimes people just do need to slow down a little bit and think through what the implications of what they're trying to do are. So maybe there's going to be, like these more, rigid AI, I know there's going to be more rigid AI compliance and regulatory standards that are going to come up. And what those are going to be, who knows?
Yeah, and I mean, I think there already are. I mean, and just similar to GDPR and privacy. I mean, there's different ones in the that the EU is talking about than the US, and there's the NIST and the ISO and around cyber, and I mean, I think overall the general regulatory climate around cyber and that whole area is we're probably going to see a lot more there, just with the predominance and proliferation of some of the recent attacks and threats that are out there. I think knock on wood, we'll get our arms around it, but I mean they're using AI now in that, and so it's become very interesting.
Well, yeah, I mean, and Anthropic just released that report on how they had a basically fully autonomous system that was just running attacks. So that's coming.
Yeah. So yeah, there's that, right? That sounds.
There's that. That's going to be awesome. But I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we keep going back to this. Everything's moving so fast. Everything's moving so fast, and then you have to slow down to make sure you're doing things right. And those two things are very much at odds right now.
Yeah.
And so I gotta imagine a ton of stuff is slipping through the cracks right now, and there's gonna have to be necessarily a lot of analysis of what we've built and what we've done, and really piecing through all of that to really understand where we sit with all of it, right?
Yeah, and I think I mean, we talked about it's providing more time for the organization to do other things, right? Like if I think about our internal audit teams, right? I mean, they are going to need a lot more time to do these kinds of analysis and these kinds of special projects to look at some of these things at companies, rather than, doing sampling and testing and, those kind of things that they've just naturally done. I think the types of things that and the activities that those functions are going to be doing are going to change, and there's going to be a need for them to do other things. So I think across the board, you're going to see that. So.
Well, yeah, maybe it's, like you said, all this free time that we're getting back, those people aren't going to get to spend more time with their family. They're now going to have to learn how to do security work and analyze everything.
Well, we hope that they get some time. We hope that we contribute a little bit to the work-life balance of our customers and the teams that are customers.
Yeah, maybe AI will create enough problems for itself that we have a whole new industry that's going to spawn up jobs for everyone in making sure it's safe. That's an interesting twist on the whole thing. Makes you more confused about what's going on. So I got to imagine this is all great signs for Workiva going into the future.
Exciting, huh? Yeah. I mean, I think complexity, making simplifying complex things, helping our customers be more efficient, to drive greater value, and certainly with what we're looking at with the data and AI and engaging in that story and helping them be as effective and productive as possible, there's a huge opportunity. So and we've got high customer sat, so we want to continue to keep that bar high with all of our
keep that NPS score high,
97%. So we want to keep that bar high and make sure we're continuing to delight our customers. So
that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on and sharing all your wisdom and oh yeah, no, this has been a great conversation. I love when the realities of the world kind of collide with the business, and the business has to react quickly, and if they do, it's a strategic advantage. And I think that's kind of what you guys are helping to bring to the market, and I think that's very cool. And if they want to find you guys, where should they go?
Workiva.com.
Workiva.com.
Yes.
Okay. Head there right now.
Okay.
Thanks so much for being on, Kim.
Great.
Appreciate
Chris,
it.
thanks so much. Take care.